Picture the most intelligent person you know. Someone with multiple degrees, perhaps a PhD, who speaks eloquently about complex topics and seems to have an answer for everything. Now imagine watching this same person make a decision so spectacularly wrong that it defies all logic. You might think this is rare, an exception to the rule. But you would be mistaken. The truth is far more unsettling and far more common than we dare to admit. Intelligence should be our greatest weapon against stupidity. It should protect us from making foolish choices and guide us toward better outcomes. Yet across history, across cultures, and across every field of human endeavour, we find the same disturbing pattern. The smartest people among us often make the most catastrophic mistakes. Not just simple errors or momentary lapses in judgment, but profound blunders that shake entire industries, destroy careers, and sometimes change the course of human history. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. This is a fundamental feature of how intelligence works in the human mind. Smart people do not just happen to make dumb decisions occasionally. They are actually more prone to certain types of errors than people of average intelligence. Their very brilliance becomes the source of their blindness. Their sophisticated reasoning becomes the architect of their downfall. The ancient Greeks had a word for this phenomenon, though they did not fully understand it. They called it hubris, the dangerous pride that comes before the fall. But we now know this goes much deeper than simple arrogance. Modern psychology and neuroscience have revealed that intelligence itself creates specific vulnerabilities in human thinking. The same mental processes that make us smart also make us susceptible to particular kinds of stupidity. The more intelligent we become, the more sophisticated our capacity for self-deception grows. We are about to journey into the dark side of human intelligence. We will explore why the brightest minds can produce the darkest results. We will examine the psychological traps that ensnare the educated and the cognitive biases that flourish in fertile minds. Most importantly, we will discover how to recognize these patterns in ourselves and others. Because understanding the stupidity of the smart is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a survival skill for navigating our complex world. Part 1. When Brilliance Breeds Blindness. Let me tell you about one of the most spectacular intellectual failures in human history. It involves a man whose name became synonymous with scientific brilliance, whose work laid the foundation for our understanding of thermodynamics and electrical theory. Lord Kelvin was not just smart, he was a genius of the highest order. He gave us the absolute zero temperature scale that still bears his name today. He helped lay the first transatlantic telegraph cable, connecting continents through his engineering prowess. Queen Victoria herself made him a lord in recognition of his contributions to science and technology. And yet this same brilliant mind calculated that the Earth was only 20 to 40 million years old. Not billions of years as we now know, but mere millions. His mathematics were flawless, his methodology was sound, and his reasoning followed logical principles that had served him well throughout his career. But he was wrong by a factor of more than 100. How does a genius of this caliber make such a monumental error? The answer reveals something deeply troubling about the nature of intelligence itself. Kelvin based his calculation on what seemed like solid scientific ground. He assumed that Earth began as a molten ball of rock and had been cooling ever since. Using the laws of thermodynamics that he himself had helped develop, he calculated how long this cooling process would take. His mistake was not in his math or his physics. His mistake was in his absolute confidence that he understood all the relevant factors. He could not imagine that there might be unknown mechanisms heating the Earth from within. Radioactivity had not yet been discovered, so he had no way to account for the internal heat generated by radioactive decay. But more importantly, his brilliance made him certain that his method was complete and correct. This is the first deadly trap of intelligence, the illusion of comprehensive understanding. Smart people are exceptionally good at building logical frameworks and mathematical models. They can take complex problems and break them down into manageable pieces. They can identify patterns and relationships that escape ordinary minds. But this very ability creates a dangerous overconfidence in their own mental constructs. They become so impressed with the elegance of their reasoning that they forget to question their basic assumptions. Kelvin could not conceive that his model of Earth's cooling might be fundamentally incomplete. His intelligence had given him powerful tools for analysis, but it had also given him blind spots. He was like a master chess player who could see dozens of moves ahead but failed to notice that he was playing on the wrong board entirely. The more sophisticated his calculations became, the more invested he grew in their correctness. Intelligence does not just help us solve problems, it helps us defend our solutions with increasing sophistication. But Kelvin was not alone in this type of brilliant failure. Consider Charles Darwin, whose theory of evolution by natural selection stands as one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history. Darwin saw patterns in nature that had escaped thousands of observers before him. He recognized that species changed over time and identified the mechanism by which this change occurred. His insight was so profound that it revolutionized not just biology, but our entire understanding of life itself. And yet Darwin believed in a theory of heredity that would have made his own theory of evolution impossible. At the time, the dominant theory was that traits from parents were blended in their offspring, like mixing paint colors. If a tall parent and a short parent had children, those children would be medium height. This might seem reasonable at first glance, but it creates a devastating problem for evolution. If traits are always blended and averaged, then variation disappears over time. Within just a few generations, all individuals in a population would become essentially identical. There would be no raw material for natural selection to work with. Evolution would grind to a halt before it could even begin. Darwin was brilliant enough to see the grand pattern of evolution, but not quite brilliant enough to see the fatal flaw in his supporting logic. His intelligence allowed him to make one of the greatest discoveries in scientific history while simultaneously accepting a theory that contradicted his own discovery. How is this possible? Because intelligence is not a single unified force. It is a collection of different mental abilities that do not always work together harmoniously. We can be exceptionally insightful in one area while remaining surprisingly blind in another. This compartmentalization of intelligence creates what psychologists call the intelligence paradox. The same mind that can solve complex problems in one domain can fail spectacularly when those problems intersect with other domains. Darwin was a brilliant naturalist and a keen observer of biological patterns, but he was not a mathematician or a statistician. He could see evolution in action, but he could not see the mathematical requirements for evolution to function. His genius was both his strength and his weakness. Even Albert Einstein, perhaps the most famous genius of the modern era, fell into similar traps. His general theory of relativity predicted that the universe should be either expanding or contracting. But Einstein, like most scientists of his time, believed the universe was static and unchanging. Rather than accepting what his own equations told him, he added a cosmological constant to force his theory to produce a static universe. He later called this his greatest blunder. But the real blunder was not adding the constant. The real blunder was removing it when he discovered the universe was indeed expanding. We now know that the cosmological constant was actually correct and is essential for explaining the accelerating expansion of the universe. Einstein's mistake reveals another crucial aspect of intelligent failure. Smart people often trust their intuitive beliefs more than their analytical results. When Einstein's equations suggested an expanding universe, his intuition rebelled. A static universe just felt more reasonable, more elegant, more correct. So he used his considerable mathematical skill to force his theory to match his intuition rather than accepting what the math was trying to tell him. Intelligence gave him the tools to override his own discovery. These are not isolated cases or historical curiosities. They represent a fundamental pattern that continues to play out in every field of human endeavour. The pharmaceutical industry has repeatedly produced drugs that seemed brilliant in theory, but proved disastrous in practice. Thalidomide was hailed as a miracle sedative and morning sickness treatment in the 1950s and 60s. The scientists who developed it were not incompetent. They were highly trained professionals working with the best knowledge available at the time. But their confidence in their understanding led them to overlook crucial testing that would have revealed the drug's tendency to cause severe birth defects. Thousands of children were born with stunted limbs because intelligent people were too confident in their intelligence. The pattern repeats itself across domains and decades. Brilliant economists created mathematical models that predicted stable markets right up until those markets collapsed in spectacular fashion. Talented engineers designed structures that were marvels of calculation but failed to account for real-world conditions they had not anticipated. Gifted political strategists crafted campaigns that were logically sound but emotionally tone-deaf. In each case, intelligence provided the tools for both achievement and failure. The same mental processes that enabled breakthrough insights also enabled breakthrough blindness. Part 2. The Overconfidence Engine. There is a specific mechanism inside the human brain that transforms intelligence into stupidity, and it operates so smoothly that most people never notice it working. Psychologists call it the overconfidence effect, but that clinical term hardly captures its devastating power. This is not simple arrogance or vanity. This is a systematic distortion in how smart people process information about their own abilities. The more intelligent someone becomes, the more this distortion grows, like a cancer feeding on its host's greatest strength. Consider this unsettling experiment conducted with clinical psychologists and psychology students. Researchers gave them a case study and asked them to make diagnoses while rating their confidence in those diagnoses. As the subjects received more information about the case, something fascinating and terrible happened. Their confidence soared from 33% to 53%. They felt increasingly certain they were getting the right answer, but their actual accuracy remained stubbornly low, hovering below 30% throughout the entire process. More information made them more wrong, not more right. But it made them feel more right, and that feeling was more powerful than reality itself. This is the overconfidence engine in its purest form. Intelligence gives us the ability to construct increasingly sophisticated explanations for why we must be correct. Each new piece of information gets filtered through our existing beliefs and woven into our growing certainty. We do not become more accurate, we become more convinced of our accuracy. The most disturbing aspect of this process is its invisibility to the people experiencing it. When you ask someone to rate their confidence at 99% certainty, you expect them to be wrong about 1% of the time. Instead, they are wrong about 20% of the time. That means they are 20 times more confident than they deserve to be. But they do not feel overconfident. They feel appropriately confident because their intelligence has constructed a perfect justification for their certainty. This creates what researchers call the bias blind spot. Smart people are exceptionally good at recognizing cognitive biases in others while remaining completely blind to those same biases in themselves. They can spot confirmation bias in their opponent's arguments with laser precision. They can identify overconfidence in their colleagues with surgical accuracy. But when it comes to their own thinking, they see only clarity and rationality. Their intelligence has created a perfect mirror that shows them only what they want to see. The mechanism works like this. When intelligent people encounter information, they do not simply absorb it neutrally. Instead, they actively search for ways that information supports their existing beliefs. If the information seems to contradict those beliefs, their intelligence kicks into high gear to explain away the contradiction. They generate alternative interpretations. They question the source. They identify potential flaws in the data. All of this feels like careful, rational analysis, but it is actually sophisticated self-deception. Imagine a brilliant climate scientist who has built his career on a particular theory about atmospheric warming. When new data emerges that seems to challenge his theory, he does not simply accept it and revise his views. Instead, his formidable intelligence goes to work protecting his investment. He analyzes the methodology of the challenging studies and finds potential weaknesses. He reinterprets the data in ways that support his original theory. He constructs elaborate explanations for why the apparent contradictions are not actually contradictory. Each step in this process feels rational and necessary, but the cumulative effect is to insulate him from reality. This is not conscious deception or deliberate dishonesty. This is intelligence operating exactly as it was designed to operate, but in service of the wrong master. Our brains evolved to help us survive in small social groups, where being wrong could mean death or exile. In that environment, it was often more important to appear confident than to be correct. A leader who expressed doubt might lose followers and leave the group vulnerable. A hunter who questioned his abilities might hesitate at a crucial moment and miss his prey. Confidence was a survival tool, and intelligence evolved to support that confidence. But in our modern world, the stakes have changed while the mental mechanisms have remained the same. An overconfident surgeon can kill patients. An overconfident engineer can design bridges that collapse. An overconfident economist can create financial models that destroy entire economies. The intelligence that once helped our ancestors survive in the wilderness now threatens our survival in the complexity of civilization. Part 3. The Rationalization Machine. Human intelligence is not just a problem-solving device. It is also the most sophisticated excuse-making machine ever created by evolution. When smart people make bad decisions, they do not simply admit their mistakes and move on. Instead, they deploy their considerable mental resources to explain why their bad decisions were actually good decisions that happened to have bad outcomes. This process is so automatic and so convincing that even the people doing it rarely realize what is happening. Consider the phenomenon that psychologists call motivated reasoning. This is not the same as ordinary reasoning, where we start with evidence and work towards conclusions. Motivated reasoning works in reverse. We start with the conclusion we want to reach, and then we use our intelligence to find evidence that supports that conclusion. The more intelligent we are, the better we become at this backwards process. We can construct elaborate logical frameworks that make our desired conclusions seem not just reasonable, but inevitable. This is why smart people can look at exactly the same evidence and reach completely opposite conclusions. Take climate change as an example. Both sides of this debate include highly intelligent scientists, economists, and policy experts. They have access to the same data, the same research studies, the same basic facts about atmospheric chemistry and global temperature patterns. Yet they reach radically different conclusions about what this evidence means and what should be done about it. How is this possible? The answer lies in the motivated reasoning process. People who are politically conservative tend to view climate change as a threat to their economic and social values. Their intelligence immediately goes to work finding flaws in the evidence for human-caused warming. They identify uncertainties in climate models, they question the reliability of temperature measurements, they emphasize the role of natural climate variation. None of this analysis is necessarily wrong or dishonest, but it is selectively applied to support a predetermined conclusion. Meanwhile, people who are politically liberal tend to view climate change as confirmation of their concerns about corporate power and environmental destruction. Their intelligence goes to work highlighting the strongest evidence for human-caused warming. They emphasize the consensus among climate scientists, they focus on the most dramatic temperature trends, they downplay uncertainties and natural variations. Again, none of this analysis is necessarily wrong or dishonest, but it is also selectively applied to support a predetermined conclusion. Both sides believe they're following the evidence wherever it leads. Both sides can point to impressive arrays of data and analysis that support their positions. Both sides can identify flaws and biases in their opponent's reasoning. But neither side recognizes that their own intelligence has been conscripted into service as a lawyer rather than a judge. They are not seeking truth. They are building the strongest possible case for what they already believe. The more intelligent they are, the stronger that case becomes. This rationalization machine becomes especially dangerous when smart people make high-stakes decisions. A pharmaceutical company executive who has invested millions of dollars in developing a new drug cannot easily admit that the drug might be dangerous. His intelligence will find ways to reinterpret safety data that suggests problems. He will emphasize studies that show benefits while questioning studies that show risks. He will construct elaborate theories about why apparent side effects are actually caused by other factors. Each step in this process feels like careful scientific analysis. But the cumulative effect is to rationalize a decision that puts people in danger. The same pattern plays out in boardrooms around the world every day. Executives who have committed their companies to particular strategies cannot easily acknowledge when those strategies are failing. Their intelligence generates increasingly creative explanations for why apparent failures are actually temporary setbacks. They redefine success metrics to make bad results look better. They blame external factors like market conditions or competitor actions. They double down on failing strategies, because admitting failure would require admitting that their intelligence led them astray. Perhaps nowhere is this rationalization machine more dangerous than in the field of medicine. Doctors spend years training their minds to make complex diagnostic decisions based on incomplete information. This training creates immense confidence in their clinical judgment, but it also creates resistance to information that challenges their initial diagnoses. When a patient does not respond to treatment as expected, the doctor's intelligence immediately begins generating alternative explanations. Maybe the patient is not taking the medication properly. Maybe there are complicating factors that were not initially apparent. Maybe the treatment needs more time to work. All of these explanations might be correct, but they also might be elaborate rationalizations that prevent the doctor from reconsidering the original diagnosis. The more medical training a doctor has, the more sophisticated these rationalizations can become. They can construct complex pathophysiological theories that explain away contradictory evidence. They can cite rare medical conditions that might account for unusual symptoms. They can invoke individual patient variation to explain why standard treatments are not working. Intelligence provides an endless supply of reasons to avoid admitting that the initial diagnosis might have been wrong. The tragedy is that this rationalization process often feels like good doctoring. Doctors are taught to be thorough and consider multiple possibilities. They are trained to avoid jumping to conclusions and to persist in the face of initial setbacks. These are generally admirable qualities that serve patients well. But when combined with the overconfidence that comes from extensive training, they can become obstacles to recognizing and correcting mistakes. The same intelligence that makes doctors capable of healing can also make them incapable of admitting when their healing efforts have gone wrong. Part 4. Masters of Disaster. History is littered with the wreckage of brilliant minds who were absolutely certain they were right. These were not ordinary people making ordinary mistakes. These were intellectual giants whose errors became legendary precisely because their intelligence made those errors so spectacular and so consequential. Let me take you on a journey through some of the most instructive failures in human history. In 1912, the Titanic represented the pinnacle of human engineering and technological achievement. It was designed by some of the smartest naval architects of the era, men who had studied every aspect of ship design and construction. They incorporated the latest safety features, including watertight compartments that could contain flooding even if the ship's hull was breached. The ship was so well designed that they called it unsinkable. That confidence was not mere marketing hype. It was the reasoned conclusion of brilliant engineers who had done their calculations and considered every possibility they could imagine. But their intelligence created blind spots that proved fatal. They designed the watertight compartments to handle flooding in up to 4 compartments simultaneously. This seemed more than adequate because they could not imagine any accident that would breach more than 4 compartments at once. Their calculations were flawless, but their assumptions were incomplete. When the Titanic struck an iceberg, the impact opened 6 compartments to the sea. The brilliant engineering that was supposed to save the ship actually hastened its sinking by creating a false sense of security. The disaster was compounded by other manifestations of misplaced intelligence. The ship carried only enough lifeboats for about half the people on board, not because of cost-cutting, but because regulations had not kept pace with ship size. Smart regulators had written rules based on smaller ships and had not updated them for vessels of Titanic's unprecedented size. Meanwhile, the crew had never conducted a full-scale lifeboat drill because intelligent managers assumed that an unsinkable ship would never need to evacuate all its passengers. Intelligence and expertise, applied with confidence but without wisdom, created a perfect storm of preventable tragedy. Fast forward to 1986, and we find another example of brilliant minds creating catastrophic failure. The Challenger space shuttle was designed by some of the most talented engineers and scientists in the world. NASA had successfully launched dozens of shuttle missions and had developed incredible expertise in spaceflight operations. The organization was filled with people who had advanced degrees in physics, engineering, and mathematics. They had solved countless technical problems and had earned a reputation for precision and excellence. But their intelligence became a trap that killed 7 astronauts and traumatized a nation. The problem was not a lack of knowledge or expertise. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, knew that cold weather could cause the rubber O-rings to fail. They had data showing that O-ring performance degraded as temperatures dropped. They had recommended against launching when temperatures were too low. But when faced with pressure to launch on schedule, NASA managers used their intelligence to rationalize away the risks. They reanalyzed the data and found ways to interpret it that supported their desire to proceed. They questioned the engineers' assumptions and demanded more definitive proof of danger. They applied rigorous logical analysis to conclude that the launch should proceed. The tragedy was not that stupid people made a stupid decision. The tragedy was that intelligent people used their intelligence to override their own safety experts. They constructed rational-sounding arguments for why the risks were acceptable. They applied sophisticated decision-making frameworks that led them to the wrong conclusion. Their intelligence gave them confidence in their reasoning, even when that reasoning led them away from the truth. The same mental processes that had made NASA successful in previous missions contributed to their most devastating failure. The business world offers equally instructive examples of intelligent failure. Consider the story of Polaroid, a company founded by one of the most brilliant inventors of the 20th century. Edwin Land was not just smart, he was a visionary who revolutionized photography by creating cameras that could develop pictures instantly. His company dominated the instant photography market for decades and earned billions of dollars. Land and his team of talented engineers and scientists seemed unstoppable. They had created something that millions of people wanted and had built a highly profitable business around their innovation. But when digital photography began to emerge in the 1980s and 90s, Polaroid's intelligence became a liability. The company's leaders were experts in chemical photography and film processing. They understood the physics of instant development and the chemistry of color formation. Their expertise told them that digital images lacked the quality and immediacy of instant film. They could point to technical limitations in early digital cameras and explain why instant film would always be superior. Their analysis was logically sound and technically accurate, but it was also strategically suicidal. The problem was not that Polaroid's leaders were wrong about the technical limitations of early digital photography. They were absolutely correct that digital images in the 1980s and 90s were inferior to instant film in many ways. The problem was that their intelligence made them confident that these limitations were permanent rather than temporary. They could not imagine a future where digital technology would improve rapidly enough to make their expertise obsolete. Their deep knowledge of photography became a prison that prevented them from seeing beyond the boundaries of their own field. They were too smart for their own good, and their company ultimately filed for bankruptcy as digital photography conquered the world. The same pattern repeated itself at Kodak, another photography giant with even deeper expertise in imaging technology. Kodak actually invented the first digital camera in 1975, years before most people had heard of digital photography. But the company's leaders were brilliant enough to calculate that digital photography would threaten their highly profitable film business. They made the intelligent decision to suppress their own innovation rather than cannibalize their existing revenue streams. This was not stupidity. It was sophisticated strategic thinking that prioritized short-term profits over long-term survival. Their intelligence told them exactly what digital photography would do to their business model, and they used that intelligence to avoid confronting the implications. These failures share a common thread: intelligent people who were victims of their own expertise. They knew so much about their particular domains that they could not imagine those domains changing in fundamental ways. Their intelligence gave them confidence in their predictions and resistance to information that challenged their assumptions. They were not failing because they lacked information or analytical ability. They were failing because their information and analytical ability created overconfidence in their ability to predict and control the future. Intelligence, it turns out, can be its own worst enemy. Part 5. The Curse of Deep Knowledge. There is a cruel irony embedded in human expertise. The more you know about something, the harder it becomes to imagine not knowing it. Psychologists call this the curse of knowledge, but that term barely captures its devastating effects on intelligent decision-making. When people become experts in any field, their deep understanding fundamentally changes how they perceive problems and evaluate solutions. What feels like wisdom is often a sophisticated form of blindness. Consider what happens when a brilliant engineer designs a new product. She has spent years mastering the technical complexities of her field. She understands material properties, manufacturing processes, and performance specifications in extraordinary detail. When she looks at her creation, she sees elegance and functionality. She can appreciate subtle design choices that optimize performance in ways that only another expert would recognize. But she has lost the ability to see her product through the eyes of an ordinary user. This is not a failure of intelligence, it is a consequence of intelligence. The same mental processes that allowed her to master complex technical knowledge have reorganized her perception in ways that make simple user experiences difficult to anticipate. She knows too much about how the product works to remember what it feels like not to know. Her expertise has become a barrier between her and the very people she is trying to serve. The technology industry is filled with examples of this phenomenon. Brilliant software developers create programs that are marvels of efficient code and elegant architecture. But these same programs are often bewildering to ordinary users because their creators cannot imagine what it feels like to encounter the software for the first time. The developers know every feature, every shortcut, every hidden capability. They design interfaces that make perfect sense to people who already understand the underlying system, but they struggle to create interfaces that make sense to people who just want to accomplish simple tasks. This curse of knowledge extends far beyond product design. It affects how experts communicate, how they teach, and how they make decisions that impact non-experts. A brilliant doctor who has spent decades studying human physiology may struggle to explain a medical condition to a patient in terms that are both accurate and comprehensible. The doctor's deep knowledge makes it difficult for her to identify which aspects of the condition are most relevant to the patient's understanding and decision-making. She may focus on fascinating but irrelevant technical details while glossing over simple but crucial information. Her expertise helps her make better diagnoses, but may hinder her ability to help patients make informed choices about their treatment. The curse becomes even more dangerous when experts are making decisions that affect large numbers of people. Urban planners with advanced degrees in transportation engineering may design traffic systems that optimize flow according to sophisticated mathematical models. But they may fail to account for how real people actually behave when they encounter those systems. Their models assume rational actors who follow optimal routes and obey all traffic rules. The reality is messier, with drivers who take familiar routes even when they are not optimal, who make impulsive lane changes, and who sometimes ignore traffic signals. The experts' deep knowledge of traffic theory may lead them to create systems that work beautifully on paper but fail miserably in practice. Financial experts provide another sobering example of how deep knowledge can become a liability. The 2008 financial crisis was not caused by ignorant people making ignorant decisions. It was caused by some of the smartest people in the world, armed with the most sophisticated analytical tools ever created, making decisions that seemed rational within their expert frameworks. These experts understood complex mathematical models that could price exotic financial instruments with apparent precision. They knew how to calculate risk and return relationships using advanced statistical techniques. They had deep knowledge of market theory and decades of experience in financial markets. But their expertise created blind spots that proved catastrophic. They became so focused on the mathematical properties of their financial instruments that they lost sight of the human behavior underlying those instruments. They knew how mortgage-backed securities were supposed to behave according to their models, but they failed to anticipate how homeowners would actually behave when housing prices stopped rising. Their deep knowledge of financial theory made them confident in their risk assessments, even when those assessments were based on assumptions that had never been tested in real-world conditions. The more sophisticated their models became, the more confident they grew in their predictions. Intelligence and expertise, applied without wisdom, created systemic risk that nearly brought down the global financial system. The curse of knowledge also affects how experts learn and adapt. When you have invested years in mastering a particular approach to solving problems, it becomes psychologically difficult to acknowledge that your approach might be fundamentally flawed. Your expertise is not just your professional identity, it is part of your personal identity. Admitting that your expertise is inadequate feels like admitting that you are inadequate. So, when evidence emerges that challenges your expert knowledge, your intelligence goes to work protecting that knowledge rather than updating it. You find ways to explain away contradictory evidence or to reinterpret it in ways that preserve your existing understanding. This defensive response is not conscious or deliberate. Experts genuinely believe they are being appropriately skeptical of new information that contradicts their hard-won knowledge. They apply rigorous analytical standards to evidence that challenges their expertise while being more accepting of evidence that confirms it. This feels like good scientific practice, but it is actually a sophisticated form of self-deception. The same intelligence that made them experts in the first place becomes a barrier to recognizing when their expertise has become outdated or incomplete. They become prisoners of their own knowledge, unable to escape even when their cell doors are standing wide open. Part 6. When smart hearts make dumb choices. Intelligence is not just about logic and analysis. It also involves understanding people, reading social situations, and navigating the complex emotional landscapes of human relationships. But here, too, we find that being smart can make us spectacularly stupid in ways that destroy careers, wreck relationships, and undermine our most important goals. Emotional and social intelligence can fail just as dramatically as analytical intelligence, often with even more devastating personal consequences. Consider the brilliant scientist who can unravel the mysteries of quantum mechanics but cannot understand why his colleagues avoid him at faculty meetings. He has mastered some of the most complex mathematical concepts ever developed, but he cannot master the simple art of listening without interrupting. His intelligence tells him that ideas should be evaluated based on their logical merit, not on how diplomatically they are presented. He believes that if he just explains his position clearly enough, other people will naturally see that he is correct. But his intellectual confidence comes across as arrogance. His precision sounds like condescension, and his logical arguments feel like personal attacks to people who disagree with him. His analytical brilliance becomes social blindness. This is not an uncommon pattern among highly intelligent people. They often excel in domains where problems have clear solutions and success can be measured objectively. But they struggle in domains where success depends on building consensus, managing emotions, and navigating political complexities. Their intelligence trained them to value being right above being effective. They learned to win arguments by marshalling superior evidence and applying rigorous logic. But many real-world situations cannot be resolved through argument alone. They require the ability to understand how other people think and feel, to find common ground despite disagreement, and to influence behavior through persuasion rather than proof. These skills are not less important than analytical intelligence, but they are entirely different kinds of intelligence. The business world is full of brilliant people who have been derailed by their inability to navigate social and emotional complexities. Take the example of a highly intelligent engineer who gets promoted to management because of her technical expertise. She approaches leadership the same way she approached engineering problems. By analyzing the situation, identifying optimal solutions, and implementing those solutions efficiently. When her team members resist her initiatives, she assumes they simply do not understand the logic behind her decisions. So she explains her reasoning in greater detail, provides more data to support her conclusions, and becomes frustrated when people still do not comply. Her intelligence tells her that rational people should be convinced by rational arguments. But she fails to understand that people are not purely rational beings who make decisions based solely on logical analysis. Her team members may resist her initiatives for reasons that have nothing to do with the logical merits of those initiatives. They may feel that their input was not solicited or valued. They may be concerned about how the changes will affect their job security or work relationships. They may simply need time to adjust to new ways of doing things. These concerns are not irrational, but they are not primarily analytical either. They require emotional intelligence to recognize and social intelligence to address. The manager's analytical brilliance becomes a handicap because it prevents her from seeing the non-analytical dimensions of the problem she is trying to solve. Political leaders provide some of the most spectacular examples of social and emotional intelligence failures. History is full of brilliant political strategists who could analyze polling data, understand policy implications, and craft sophisticated campaign messages, but who destroyed their careers through tone-deaf personal behavior. They understood the intellectual aspects of politics but failed to grasp its emotional and social dimensions. They could calculate the logical consequences of their policy positions, but could not anticipate the emotional reactions those positions would generate. Their intelligence made them confident in their ability to control public opinion through rational persuasion, but they underestimated the power of emotion, intuition, and personal connection in shaping how people respond to political messages. Consider the phenomenon of highly intelligent people who excel in their professional lives but struggle in their personal relationships. A brilliant surgeon who can perform complex operations with precision and composure may be completely unable to handle conflict with his spouse. His medical training taught him to remain objective, analyze problems systematically, and implement solutions based on evidence and expertise. But when his wife tries to discuss relationship problems, he approaches the conversation like a medical consultation. He listens for symptoms, formulates diagnoses, and prescribes solutions. He becomes frustrated when she does not simply follow his recommendations, and he cannot understand why she gets upset when he points out the logical flaws in her emotional reactions. His intelligence is not serving him well in this context because relationships are not medical problems to be solved. They are ongoing emotional connections that require empathy, vulnerability, and mutual understanding. His wife may not want him to fix her problems, she may just want him to understand how she feels. She may not need logical analysis of their relationship dynamics, she may need emotional support and validation. But his intelligence has trained him to believe that understanding means analysis, and that helping means providing solutions. He cannot see that sometimes the most intelligent thing to do is to set aside your intelligence and simply be present with another person's emotional experience. This pattern becomes even more problematic when intelligent people become parents. They may approach child-rearing the same way they approach other complex problems. By researching best practices, developing systematic strategies, and implementing evidence-based interventions. They read parenting books, consult developmental psychology research, and create detailed plans for optimizing their children's growth and education. All of this can be helpful, but it can also create unrealistic expectations and emotional distance. Children are not optimization problems to be solved. They are complex human beings with their own personalities, needs, and developmental timelines. They need love, patience, and acceptance more than they need perfectly executed parenting strategies. But intelligent parents may become so focused on doing everything right that they lose sight of the simple human connection that matters most. Part 7. The Velocity Trap. Speed kills, especially when it comes to intelligent decision-making. There is something seductive about the ability to process information quickly and arrive at conclusions faster than other people. Smart people often take pride in their mental agility, their capacity to see patterns rapidly and make connections that others miss. But this very strength becomes a weakness when rapid thinking replaces careful consideration. The faster our minds work, the more likely we are to race past important details, ignore crucial alternatives, and commit to courses of action before we have fully understood their implications. The modern world rewards speed in ways that can be dangerous for intelligent people. In business, we celebrate leaders who can make quick decisions and move fast to capture opportunities. In technology, we admire programmers who can code quickly and entrepreneurs who can pivot rapidly in response to market feedback. In academia, we respect scholars who can produce research at high volume and respond to intellectual challenges with immediate insights. All of this creates pressure for intelligent people to operate at maximum velocity, but velocity and wisdom are often incompatible. The faster you think, the less time you have to question your thinking. Consider what happens in high-pressure business environments where intelligent people are expected to make important decisions quickly. A venture capital firm receives hundreds of investment proposals each month and needs to evaluate them rapidly to stay competitive. The partners are brilliant people with advanced degrees and years of experience in business and finance. They have developed sophisticated frameworks for analyzing business opportunities and can quickly identify the key factors that determine success or failure. But the pressure to move fast means they often make investment decisions based on limited information and initial impressions. They do not have time to conduct thorough due diligence or to carefully consider alternative scenarios. Their intelligence allows them to construct compelling narratives about why particular investments will succeed, but those narratives may be based more on pattern matching than on deep analysis. The result is that even the smartest venture capital firms make many investments that fail spectacularly. They are not failing because they lack intelligence or experience. They are failing because the velocity of their decision-making process prevents them from applying their intelligence and experience effectively. They see what they expect to see based on familiar patterns, and they do not take time to look for what they do not expect to see. Their rapid thinking creates confidence that can override more careful analysis. Speed becomes a substitute for depth, and intelligence becomes a tool for justifying hasty decisions rather than making better ones. The same velocity trap affects intelligent people in high-stakes professional situations. Emergency room doctors must make life and death decisions quickly based on incomplete information. Their medical training has taught them to recognize patterns rapidly and to act decisively, even under uncertainty. These are crucial skills that save lives every day. But the same rapid pattern recognition that makes emergency medicine possible can also lead to diagnostic errors when doctors jump to conclusions too quickly. They may see symptoms that fit a familiar pattern and immediately assume they know what is wrong with the patient. Their intelligence allows them to construct coherent explanations for the patient's condition, but those explanations may be wrong if they are based on incomplete pattern matching rather than thorough evaluation. This is not a criticism of emergency medicine or emergency physicians. Working in emergency situations requires trade-offs between speed and thoroughness, and doctors generally make those trade-offs appropriately. But the velocity trap illustrates how even appropriate rapid thinking can become problematic when it becomes habitual. Doctors who spend years making quick decisions in emergency situations may carry that rapid thinking style into situations where more deliberation would be beneficial. They may become impatient with thorough analysis and overly confident in their ability to diagnose complex cases quickly. Their intelligence and experience make rapid thinking feel accurate even when it is not. The technology industry provides another illustration of how intelligent people can be seduced by speed. Software developers often work in environments where rapid iteration and quick releases are valued above careful planning and thorough testing. The philosophy is to move fast and break things, to get products to market quickly and fix problems as they arise. This approach can be effective for some types of software development, especially when mistakes are easily reversible and user feedback can guide improvements. But it can also create a culture where thoughtful design and careful consideration are seen as obstacles to progress rather than essential elements of good work. Intelligent developers may rush to implement solutions without fully understanding the problems they are trying to solve. The result is often software that works in narrow technical senses but fails to serve users effectively. Developers may create products that are marvels of coding efficiency but nightmares of user experience. They may build systems that handle expected use cases perfectly but break down when confronted with real-world complexity. Their intelligence allows them to solve technical problems quickly, but speed prevents them from understanding the broader context in which those technical problems exist. They optimize for the wrong metrics because they do not take time to understand what the right metrics should be. Velocity becomes an end in itself rather than a means to better outcomes. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of the velocity trap is how it interacts with confidence. When intelligent people make decisions quickly and those decisions turn out well, they become more confident in their ability to make good decisions quickly. This creates a positive feedback loop where speed and confidence reinforce each other. Each successful rapid decision increases confidence in rapid decision-making, which leads to even faster decisions and even greater confidence. But this feedback loop can continue even when rapid decisions start producing worse outcomes. The confidence built up from previous successes can override evidence that current decisions are problematic. Intelligence provides sophisticated explanations for why apparent failures are actually successes or why bad outcomes are due to external factors rather than flawed decision-making. The velocity trap becomes a velocity prison, where speed and confidence create their own reality that may be disconnected from actual results. Part 8. The wisdom of crowds becomes the madness of mobs. One of the most counterintuitive discoveries in social psychology is that groups of intelligent people can make worse decisions than individuals working alone. This seems to violate common sense. If one smart person is good, surely 10 smart people should be better. If individual intelligence can solve complex problems, group intelligence should be able to solve even more complex problems. But the reality is far more complicated and far more disturbing. When intelligent people come together in groups, their individual brilliance can combine in ways that produce collective stupidity. The phenomenon starts with a process called groupthink, where the desire for harmony and consensus overrides critical thinking and realistic evaluation of alternatives. When intelligent people respect each other and want to maintain positive relationships, they may avoid raising concerns that could create conflict or disagreement. They assume that if no one else is expressing doubts, then there must not be any serious problems with the group's reasoning. Each person privately may have reservations, but publicly they go along with what seems to be the emerging consensus. The result is that the group appears to be in unanimous agreement even when individual members have significant private doubts. Intelligence, rather than protecting against this dynamic, can actually make it worse by providing sophisticated rationalizations for going along with the group. Consider what happened at NASA in the months leading up to the Challenger disaster. The space agency was filled with brilliant engineers, scientists and managers who had successfully planned and executed dozens of complex missions. These were not ordinary people making ordinary mistakes. They were some of the smartest people in the world, working with the most advanced technology available, supported by rigorous processes and procedures. But when they came together as a group to make the decision about whether to launch Challenger in cold weather, their collective intelligence failed catastrophically. The group dynamics that were supposed to ensure careful consideration actually prevented careful consideration from taking place. Individual engineers knew that cold weather could cause problems with the rocket's O-rings. They had data showing that O-ring performance degraded at low temperatures. They had recommended against launching when temperatures were too cold. But when the group came together to discuss the launch decision, these individual concerns were overwhelmed by group pressure to proceed. No one wanted to be the person who delayed an important mission based on uncertain risks. No one wanted to appear to be overcautious or to lack confidence in NASA's capabilities. Each person assumed that if the risks were really serious, someone else would speak up more forcefully. The intelligence and expertise that should have protected against disaster instead created a false consensus that disaster was unlikely. The same dynamic plays out in corporate boardrooms around the world. Companies recruit the smartest and most successful business leaders to serve on their boards of directors. These board members have advanced degrees, decades of experience, and proven track records of success in their own organizations. They are supposed to provide independent oversight and to ask tough questions that management might not want to hear. But too often, these intelligent and accomplished people become rubber stamps for management decisions rather than independent critics. They do not want to appear ignorant by asking basic questions, so they assume that if they do not understand something, the problem must be with their own knowledge rather than with the proposal being presented. The result is that some of the most spectacular corporate failures have occurred at companies with exceptionally intelligent and experienced boards of directors. Enron's board included former government officials, successful CEOs, and respected academics. These were not naive or inexperienced people who could be easily deceived. They were sophisticated business leaders who should have been able to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong with the company's financial reporting. But their intelligence actually worked against them by making them overconfident in their ability to understand complex financial structures, and by making them reluctant to challenge management presentations that they did not fully comprehend. They assumed that if Enron's accounting practices were problematic, someone smarter than them would have identified the problems already. The financial crisis of 2008 provides another sobering example of how intelligent groups can make catastrophically bad decisions. The major investment banks were filled with some of the smartest people in the world. They had PhDs in mathematics, physics, and economics. They had developed sophisticated computer models that could analyze risk and return relationships with apparent precision. They had access to more information and better analytical tools than any previous generation of financial professionals. But when these brilliant individuals came together in organizations, their collective decision-making became dangerously distorted. Each individual analyst might have private doubts about the sustainability of housing price increases or the reliability of mortgage-backed securities. But when everyone around them seemed confident and profitable, they assumed their doubts must be unfounded. They did not want to appear to be missing out on profitable opportunities or to be more risk-averse than their colleagues. They reasoned that if the risks were really as serious as they privately suspected, other smart people would be more concerned. The market prices suggested that risks were low, and markets supposedly reflected the collective wisdom of all participants. Individual intelligence was overwhelmed by collective overconfidence, and the result was systemic risk that nearly brought down the global financial system. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of intelligent group failures is how they create their own justification systems. When things start to go wrong, the group's intelligence is deployed not to recognize and correct the problems, but to explain why the problems are not really problems. Alternative explanations are generated, blame is assigned to external factors, and the fundamental soundness of the group's approach is preserved. The more intelligent the group members are, the more sophisticated these justification systems become. They can construct elaborate theories that explain away contradictory evidence and maintain confidence even in the face of mounting failures. Group intelligence becomes group self-deception, and the collective brilliance that was supposed to solve problems becomes a barrier to recognizing that problems exist. Part 9. The Complexity Trap. Intelligence loves complexity. There is something deeply satisfying about understanding intricate systems, mastering sophisticated techniques, and developing elaborate solutions to challenging problems. Smart people often gravitate toward complexity because it provides opportunities to demonstrate their intellectual capabilities and to distinguish themselves from those with more ordinary minds. But this attraction to complexity can become a trap that leads intelligent people to create problems that are worse than the ones they were trying to solve. The trap works like this. When confronted with a problem, intelligent people immediately begin analyzing its various dimensions and considering multiple factors that might be relevant to finding a solution. This analytical approach often reveals genuine complexities that less careful thinkers might overlook. Smart people see interdependencies, feedback loops, unintended consequences, and second-order effects that create real challenges for anyone trying to intervene in the system. All of this analysis is valuable and important. The problem comes when intelligent people become so fascinated by the complexity they have discovered that they design solutions that are equally complex. They create interventions that attempt to address every factor they have identified and to optimize for every variable they have analyzed. The result is often solutions that are technically impressive but practically unworkable. They may be theoretically optimal according to sophisticated mathematical models, but they may be too complicated for real people to understand, implement, or maintain. They may account for every contingency that intelligent analysis can anticipate, but they may be fragile when confronted with contingencies that were not anticipated. They may demonstrate the intellectual prowess of their creators, but they may fail to achieve the simple, practical goals that motivated the original problem-solving effort. Consider what happens when intelligent policymakers try to address social problems. They correctly recognize that issues like poverty, education, or healthcare involve complex interactions between economic, social, cultural, and political factors. Their analysis reveals how these different factors influence each other in subtle ways that simple interventions might not address. So they design comprehensive policy frameworks that attempt to address multiple causes simultaneously and to coordinate interventions across different domains. The resulting policies may be marvels of analytical sophistication, but they may also be impossible to implement effectively because they require levels of coordination and precision that exceed the capacity of real-world institutions. The intelligence that identified the complexity becomes a liability when it tries to create solutions that match that complexity. Healthcare provides a particularly clear example of how intelligent people can create complex solutions that generate new problems. Medical researchers have developed incredibly sophisticated treatments that can target specific molecular pathways in diseased cells. These treatments represent genuine intellectual breakthroughs that could not have been developed without deep understanding of cellular biology and biochemistry. But the complexity of these treatments often creates practical problems that simpler treatments would not have. They may require precise timing and dosing that is difficult to achieve in clinical practice. They may interact with other medications in unpredictable ways. They may produce side effects that are themselves complex and difficult to manage. The intelligence that made these sophisticated treatments possible may also make them too complicated to use safely and effectively. The technology industry provides countless examples of intelligent people creating unnecessarily complex solutions to relatively simple problems. Software developers often design systems that can handle every possible use case and provide maximum flexibility for future modifications. This seems like good engineering practice, but it often results in software that is so complex that even its creators have difficulty understanding how it works. The code may be elegant according to abstract programming principles, but it may be nearly impossible to debug when problems arise. It may provide powerful capabilities that few users actually need, while making simple tasks more difficult than they should be. The intelligence that drives developers to create comprehensive solutions becomes a barrier to creating usable solutions. Financial markets offer another illustration of how intelligent complexity can create systemic problems. Brilliant financial engineers have developed incredibly sophisticated instruments that can slice and dice risk in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades ago. These instruments allow for precise risk management and efficient capital allocation in ways that simpler financial tools cannot match. But the complexity of these instruments also makes it difficult for anyone, including their creators, to fully understand their behavior under all market conditions. When multiple complex instruments interact with each other in rapidly changing market environments, the results can be unpredictable and potentially catastrophic. The 2008 financial crisis was partly a result of intelligent people creating financial instruments that were too complex for anyone to fully comprehend or control. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the complexity trap is how it makes intelligent people resistant to simple solutions. When someone proposes a straightforward approach to a problem that they have analyzed in great detail, their first instinct is often to explain why the simple approach will not work. They can identify multiple ways that the simple solution fails to account for important factors or could produce unintended consequences. All of this analysis may be correct, but it can also prevent them from recognizing that simple solutions, despite their limitations, might be better than complex solutions that are impossible to implement effectively. Their intelligence makes them appreciate the elegance of comprehensive approaches while blinding them to the practical advantages of approaches that are good enough. They become so invested in solving problems completely that they lose sight of solving problems at all. Part 10. The Modern Epidemic. The 21st century has created unprecedented opportunities for intelligent people to make spectacular mistakes. Our interconnected, rapidly changing world rewards quick thinking and confident decision-making while punishing those who appear hesitant or uncertain. Social media amplifies both brilliance and stupidity at the speed of light. Technology gives us access to more information than any previous generation, but it also creates new ways for our intelligence to deceive us. The modern epidemic of smart people making dumb decisions is not just continuing the ancient patterns we have explored, it is accelerating and amplifying them in ways that previous generations could never have imagined. Consider the rise and fall of Theranos, a company that promised to revolutionize blood testing with technology that could run hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. The company was founded by Elizabeth Holmes, a brilliant Stanford student who had studied chemical engineering and was passionate about changing healthcare. She attracted some of the most impressive investors and board members in Silicon Valley, including former government officials, successful entrepreneurs, and respected scientists. These were not naive people who could be easily fooled by simple deception. They were intelligent, experienced professionals who had built successful careers by making smart investment decisions and identifying promising technologies. But their collective intelligence was not enough to prevent them from investing hundreds of millions of dollars in a company whose core technology never actually worked. How did so many smart people get fooled so completely? The answer lies in how modern technology culture interacts with the cognitive biases we have been exploring. Silicon Valley rewards bold vision and revolutionary thinking. Investors are trained to look for companies that can disrupt entire industries and create enormous value by doing things that everyone else thinks are impossible. This creates pressure to believe in breakthrough technologies, even when the evidence for those breakthroughs is limited. Intelligent investors who might be skeptical of extraordinary claims in other contexts become more credulous when those claims are presented in the familiar language of technological disruption. Holmes was exceptionally skilled at using this cultural context to her advantage. She presented her company's technology in terms that intelligent people wanted to believe. She talked about democratizing healthcare, making medical testing more accessible, and using cutting-edge engineering to solve important social problems. These goals resonated with investors who saw themselves as funding positive change in the world. When technical experts raised questions about whether the technology could actually work, Holmes and her supporters dismissed those concerns as examples of the kind of conventional thinking that innovative companies need to overcome. Intelligence became a liability because it made investors confident that they could distinguish between legitimate, revolutionary technology and impossible fantasy. The cryptocurrency boom and bust cycle provides another example of how modern conditions can amplify the stupidity of the smart. Some of the most brilliant computer scientists, economists, and entrepreneurs in the world became convinced that blockchain technology would revolutionize everything from banking to supply chain management to digital art. They invested enormous amounts of time, money, and intellectual capital in developing cryptocurrencies and related technologies. Many of these people had deep technical knowledge of cryptography, computer networks, and financial systems. They were not naive about technology or markets, but their intelligence made them overconfident in their ability to predict how these new technologies would be adopted and how markets would respond to them. The result was a series of boom and bust cycles where intelligent people repeatedly convinced themselves that this time would be different. Each cycle followed a similar pattern. Genuine technological innovations created new possibilities. Intelligent people analyzed those possibilities and concluded that they represented fundamental changes in how economic systems would work. And then reality proved to be more complicated and less revolutionary than the analysis suggested. But rather than learning from these cycles, many intelligent people simply moved on to the next technological innovation and repeated the same pattern of overconfident analysis and disappointed expectations. Their intelligence helped them understand the technical details of blockchain systems, but it did not help them understand the social, economic, and political factors that would determine how those systems would actually be used. Social media has created entirely new ways for intelligent people to demonstrate their stupidity to global audiences. Platforms like Twitter reward quick, confident responses to complex issues. Intelligent people who have expertise in one area often feel compelled to share their opinions about areas where they have no special knowledge. Their intelligence makes them confident that they can quickly analyze new information and arrive at reasonable conclusions. But the speed and public nature of social media prevents the kind of careful consideration that good analysis requires. The result is that brilliant scientists make embarrassing statements about politics. Successful entrepreneurs reveal their ignorance about history, and respected academics engage in flame wars that would have been unthinkable in more formal professional contexts. Intelligence becomes a performance that must be constantly demonstrated, and the pressure to appear smart leads to behaviors that are actually quite stupid. The COVID-19 pandemic created a perfect storm of conditions that led many intelligent people to make consequential mistakes. Scientists, public health officials, economists and political leaders had to make decisions about an unprecedented situation with limited information and enormous uncertainty. Their intelligence told them that they should be able to analyze the available data and develop effective responses, but the complexity and novelty of the situation exceeded their analytical capabilities. Rather than acknowledging this uncertainty, many intelligent people became overconfident in their initial assessments and resistant to changing their positions as new information became available. They used their intelligence to defend their early judgments, rather than to update those judgments based on emerging evidence. The result was that policy decisions that seemed rational at the time proved to be counterproductive or harmful when implemented in the real world. Perhaps most troubling is how modern conditions make it easier for intelligent people to avoid confronting the consequences of their mistakes. In our complex, interconnected world, it is often difficult to trace specific outcomes back to specific decisions. When things go wrong, intelligent people can always find alternative explanations that preserve their confidence in their decision-making abilities. They can blame external factors, unexpected developments, or implementation failures rather than acknowledging that their original analysis was flawed. The same intelligence that led them to make mistakes provides them with sophisticated rationalizations for why those mistakes were not really mistakes at all. This prevents the kind of learning from failure that might help them make better decisions in the future. Instead, they carry their overconfidence forward into new situations where they are likely to repeat similar patterns of intelligent failure. Part 11. The Specialization Prison. In our complex modern world, intelligence often comes with a price. The narrower our expertise becomes, the more blind we grow to everything outside our specialty. This is not an accident or a design flaw in how we organize knowledge. It is an inevitable consequence of the way human intelligence works when confronted with vast amounts of information. But the result is that some of our smartest people have become intellectual prisoners, trapped within the boundaries of their own expertise and unable to see the larger world that surrounds their specialized domains. Consider the brilliant computer scientist who can design algorithms that process millions of data points per second, but cannot understand why people resist using the software systems he creates. His intelligence has been focused with laser precision on computational problems. He has spent years mastering the mathematical foundations of computer science, learning programming languages, and developing sophisticated technical skills. Within his domain, he can solve problems that would baffle most people. But this same specialization has created blind spots that prevent him from understanding the human context in which his technical solutions must operate. He designs systems that are computationally elegant but psychologically frustrating because he cannot see beyond the technical requirements to the human needs those systems are supposed to serve. The medical field provides some of the most dramatic examples of how specialization can create dangerous blind spots. Modern medicine has produced incredible advances by dividing the human body into increasingly narrow specialties. We have cardiologists who focus exclusively on hearts, neurologists who specialize in nervous systems, and oncologists who dedicate their careers to understanding cancer. Each of these specialists develops deep knowledge that allows them to diagnose and treat conditions that would have been impossible to address just a few decades ago. But this specialization can also create tunnel vision that prevents doctors from seeing how different systems in the body interact with each other. A patient with multiple health problems may see several different specialists, each of whom provides excellent care within their narrow domain, but none of whom takes responsibility for understanding how their treatments might interact or conflict with each other. The problem becomes even more serious when specialists become so focused on their particular area of expertise that they lose sight of the whole person they are supposed to be treating. A cardiologist may become so focused on optimizing heart function that he prescribes medications that cause serious side effects in other organ systems. An oncologist may become so focused on destroying cancer cells that she recommends treatments that severely compromise the patient's quality of life. These are not failures of intelligence or competence within their specialized domains. They are failures of perspective that result from intelligence becoming too narrowly focused. The doctor's expertise makes them confident in their specialized knowledge while blinding them to the broader context in which that knowledge must be applied. Financial specialists provide another illustration of how narrow expertise can create systemic problems. The 2008 financial crisis was partly caused by extremely intelligent people who had become hyper-specialized in particular types of financial instruments. There were experts in mortgage securities who understood every detail of how those instruments were structured and priced. There were experts in credit derivatives who could calculate risk exposures with mathematical precision. There were experts in regulatory compliance who knew every rule and requirement that applied to their particular area of finance. But few of these specialists understood how their narrow domains connected to the broader financial system. Each specialist optimized for success within their own area, without considering how their decisions might create risks in other areas. Mortgage specialists focused on creating securities that would be attractive to investors without fully considering how those securities might behave during a housing market downturn. Derivatives experts focused on managing specific types of risk without considering how their risk management strategies might interact with similar strategies being used by other market participants. Regulatory specialists focused on compliance with existing rules without considering whether those rules were adequate for the new types of financial instruments being created. The result was a financial system where everyone was acting intelligently within their specialized domains, but the overall system was becoming increasingly unstable because no one was responsible for understanding how all the pieces fit together. Specialization had created expertise without wisdom, intelligence without understanding. Academic institutions often exhibit similar problems with over-specialization. Universities are organized into departments that encourage scholars to develop deep expertise in increasingly narrow areas of knowledge. This departmental structure has produced genuine advances in human understanding by allowing researchers to focus intensively on specific questions without being distracted by broader concerns. But it has also created intellectual silos where brilliant people become isolated from insights and perspectives that might inform their work. A psychologist studying human behavior may have little contact with economists who study similar phenomena from a different perspective. A historian analyzing past events may have no interaction with political scientists who study contemporary versions of similar processes. Each specialist develops sophisticated theories within their domain, but those theories may be incomplete or misleading because they do not account for insights from related fields. Intelligence becomes self-limiting when it is confined within artificial boundaries that separate interconnected aspects of reality. The technology industry has created some of the most extreme examples of specialization leading to unintended consequences. Software engineers who specialize in artificial intelligence have developed systems that can perform impressive feats of pattern recognition and data analysis. But many of these engineers have little background in psychology, sociology, or ethics, so they do not fully understand how their systems might affect human behavior or social relationships. They create algorithms that optimize for engagement or efficiency without considering whether those optimizations might have harmful effects on the people who use their systems. Their technical intelligence allows them to solve complex computational problems, but their lack of broader perspective prevents them from recognizing that the problems they are solving might not be the problems that actually need to be solved. They become so focused on making their systems work better in technical terms that they lose sight of whether their systems are making people's lives better in human terms. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of the specialization prison is how it makes intelligent people resistant to insights from outside their domains. When specialists encounter information or perspectives that come from different fields, their first instinct is often to dismiss them as irrelevant or uninformed. They assume that if the insights were really important, someone within their own specialty would have discovered them already. They may also feel that outsiders cannot possibly understand the complexities and nuances that specialists have spent years mastering. This defensive response is understandable, but it prevents specialists from learning from people who might have valuable perspectives precisely because they're not trapped within the same narrow focus. The intelligence that makes specialization possible also makes it difficult to transcend the limitations that specialization creates. Part 12. The Success Trap. Nothing breeds future failure quite like past success. This seems counterintuitive, almost paradoxical. We assume that intelligent people who have succeeded before will be more likely to succeed again, that experience is the best teacher, and that a track record of good decisions predicts future good decisions. But this assumption misses a crucial psychological dynamic. Success, especially dramatic success, fundamentally changes how intelligent people think about themselves and their abilities. It creates overconfidence, rigidity, and blindness to changing circumstances. The same qualities that led to initial success become obstacles to continued success when conditions change. Consider what happens to entrepreneurs who build successful companies. They start with innovative ideas that meet genuine market needs in ways that existing competitors cannot match. Their intelligence allows them to identify opportunities that others miss, to develop creative solutions to complex problems, and to execute their visions despite numerous obstacles and setbacks. This success is not accidental or lucky. It results from genuine insight, hard work, and intelligent decision-making. But success also creates a dangerous psychological transformation. The entrepreneurs begin to attribute their success primarily to their own brilliance rather than to the combination of skill, timing, luck, and favorable circumstances that actually made success possible. They become convinced that their particular approach to business is superior to alternatives and that their judgment is more reliable than other people's judgment. This transformation becomes problematic when market conditions change in ways that make their original approach less effective. New technologies emerge that threaten their business models. Customer preferences shift in directions they did not anticipate. Competitors develop alternative approaches that offer better value or more appealing features. But instead of adapting to these changes, successful entrepreneurs often double down on the strategies that worked in the past. Their intelligence tells them that their original approach was sound, and that current difficulties must be temporary setbacks rather than signals that fundamental changes are needed. They use their considerable analytical abilities to explain why apparent threats are not really threats and why their existing strategies will ultimately prevail. The same confidence that helped them succeed initially prevents them from recognizing when that success is no longer sustainable. The business graveyard is filled with companies that were once innovative leaders but became trapped by their own success. BlackBerry dominated the smartphone market for years by creating devices that were perfect for business users who needed reliable email and messaging capabilities. The company's leaders were intelligent people who understood their customers' needs and had built a highly successful business by serving those needs better than anyone else. But when Apple introduced the iPhone with its touchscreen interface and app ecosystem, BlackBerry's leaders dismissed it as an inferior product that lacked the security and functionality that serious business users required. Their past success made them confident that they understood what customers really wanted, and that Apple's approach was a temporary fad that would not threaten their market position. They were so invested in the business model that had made them successful that they could not see how that model was becoming obsolete. The same pattern plays out in academic careers. Brilliant researchers who make important discoveries early in their careers often become psychologically invested in the theories and methods that led to those discoveries. Their success brings recognition, prestigious positions, and influential platforms that reinforce their confidence in their original approaches. But science progresses by constantly questioning existing theories and developing new methods that can reveal previously hidden aspects of reality. Researchers who become too attached to their past successes may resist new evidence that challenges their established positions. They may use their intelligence and reputation to defend outdated theories rather than to explore new possibilities. The success that established their careers becomes an obstacle to the kind of intellectual flexibility that made their careers possible in the first place. They become prisoners of their own achievements. Political leaders provide some of the most dramatic examples of how success can breed future failure. Politicians who win elections by appealing to particular constituencies with specific messages often become convinced that their electoral success proves the universal validity of their political philosophy. They assume that the strategies that worked in one campaign will work in all future campaigns, and that the policies that resonated with voters in one context will be equally effective in all contexts. But political success often results from temporary alignments between a politician's message and the particular concerns that voters happen to have at a specific moment in time. When those concerns change, or when different issues become more prominent, the same messages and policies may no longer resonate with voters. But successful politicians often cannot see these changes because their past success has made them overconfident in their ability to understand and influence public opinion. Investment professionals face similar challenges with success, creating future blindness. Fund managers who achieve exceptional returns during particular market conditions often attribute their success to superior analytical abilities and investment strategies. They develop confidence in their ability to identify undervalued assets and to time market movements better than their competitors. This confidence attracts more investor capital, which reinforces their sense that their approach is fundamentally sound. But financial markets are constantly changing, and strategies that work in one market environment may fail catastrophically in different conditions. Fund managers who become too attached to the approaches that made them successful may continue using those approaches even when market conditions have changed in ways that make those approaches inappropriate. Their past success becomes a cognitive anchor that prevents them from adapting to new realities. They become victims of their own track records. The technology sector offers particularly vivid examples of how intelligent people can be trapped by their own success. Engineers and designers who create breakthrough products often become convinced that they have discovered universal principles of good design or superior development processes. They may establish rigid methodologies based on what worked for their successful projects and resist suggestions that different approaches might be more appropriate for different challenges. Their intelligence allows them to construct elaborate theories about why their methods are optimal, but those theories may be based more on post hoc rationalization of past success than on genuine understanding of what makes products successful. When they apply their proven methods to new projects that have different requirements or operate in different contexts, the results may be disappointing or even disastrous. But their confidence in their methods makes it difficult for them to recognize that the problem might be with their approach rather than with external factors beyond their control. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the success trap is how it makes intelligent people resistant to feedback that might help them avoid future failures. When you have a track record of success, it becomes psychologically difficult to accept criticism or to acknowledge uncertainty about future decisions. Success creates an expectation that you should know what you're doing and that your confidence should be unwavering. Admitting doubt or changing course can feel like admitting that your previous success was undeserved or that your intelligence is not as reliable as you thought. So successful people often ignore warning signs, dismiss contrary evidence, and persist with failing strategies longer than they should. Their intelligence provides sophisticated explanations for why apparent problems are not really problems and why persistence will ultimately be rewarded. The success trap becomes a success prison, where past achievements prevent future learning and future success. Part 13. The Innovation Paradox. There's a peculiar kind of stupidity that afflicts only the most intelligent people. The compulsion to reinvent perfectly good solutions simply because those solutions seem too simple or too obvious. This innovation paradox drives brilliant minds to create complex, sophisticated alternatives to approaches that already work well. They convince themselves that their intelligence entitles them to find better ways of doing things, even when better ways may not be needed or may not actually be better. The result is often elegant solutions to non-existent problems and ingenious fixes that break things that were not broken. The technology industry provides countless examples of this paradox in action. Software developers routinely create new programming frameworks, libraries, and tools that are intended to improve upon existing solutions. Many of these innovations are genuinely useful and represent real improvements in how software can be developed and maintained. But many others are created primarily because their developers wanted to demonstrate their technical sophistication rather than because they solve actual problems that existing tools cannot handle. The result is an explosion of competing standards, incompatible systems, and unnecessary complexity that makes software development more difficult rather than easier. Intelligent developers become so focused on creating something new and impressive that they lose sight of whether their innovations actually serve any useful purpose. This same pattern plays out in academic research, where intelligent scholars often feel pressure to develop novel theories and methods that will distinguish their work from what has been done before. The academic reward system incentivizes originality and innovation, which can lead researchers to propose complex new approaches to problems that simpler existing approaches already handle adequately. They may develop elaborate mathematical models that provide more precise predictions than existing models, but those gains in precision may come at the cost of increased complexity that makes the models more difficult to understand, test, or apply. The researcher's intelligence allows them to create sophisticated theories, but their desire to appear innovative may lead them to create sophistication for its own sake rather than to advance genuine understanding. Consider what happens when intelligent managers decide that existing business processes need to be improved through innovation. They may observe that their organizations use relatively simple methods for planning, decision-making, or performance evaluation. These methods may not be perfect, but they may be working reasonably well and may be understood by the people who use them. But the manager's intelligence tells them that they should be able to design better methods that are more systematic, more comprehensive, or more scientifically rigorous. So they develop elaborate new processes that incorporate multiple variables, sophisticated analytical techniques, and detailed documentation requirements. The new processes may be intellectually impressive and may address theoretical flaws in the old processes, but they may also be so complex that employees cannot use them effectively. The innovation creates problems that did not exist before, while failing to deliver the improvements it was supposed to provide. Intelligence becomes a barrier to effectiveness when it prioritizes elegance over utility. The innovation paradox becomes particularly dangerous in fields where existing solutions have been developed through long experience and practical testing. Traditional practices in fields like medicine, agriculture, or education often represent accumulated wisdom about what works in real-world conditions. These practices may not be theoretically optimal according to current scientific understanding, but they may be robust, reliable, and well adapted to the complexities and uncertainties of actual practice. But intelligent reformers often look at these traditional practices and see opportunities for improvement through the application of scientific principles or technological innovations. They design new approaches that should work better according to their analysis, but those approaches may fail when confronted with the messy realities that traditional practices have learned to handle. The reformers' intelligence makes them confident that they can improve upon accumulated experience, but their innovations may discard valuable knowledge that was embedded in practices they considered primitive or unscientific. Educational reform provides a particularly clear example of how innovation can backfire. Intelligent education researchers and policymakers regularly develop new teaching methods, assessment techniques, and curriculum designs that are intended to improve upon traditional approaches to education. These innovations are often based on sophisticated theories about how learning works and may incorporate the latest findings from cognitive science or educational psychology. But when these innovations are implemented in real classrooms with real teachers and students, the results are often disappointing. The new methods may be too complex for teachers to implement effectively, or they may require resources and training that schools do not have available. They may work well in carefully controlled research settings but fail when applied in the chaotic, resource-constrained environments where most education actually takes place. Meanwhile, traditional teaching methods that the innovations were supposed to replace may have developed their particular characteristics precisely because they are practical and sustainable under real-world conditions. These methods may not be theoretically optimal, but they may be robust enough to work reasonably well with teachers who have varying levels of skill and experience, students who have different learning styles and motivation levels, and schools that have limited time and resources. The intelligent innovators may be solving theoretical problems while creating practical problems, replacing approaches that work adequately with approaches that work poorly or not at all. Their innovation becomes a form of intellectual vandalism that destroys functional systems in pursuit of theoretical improvements. The innovation paradox is especially seductive because it allows intelligent people to feel that they are making important contributions rather than simply maintaining existing systems. There is something psychologically unsatisfying about concluding that current approaches are good enough and that no significant improvements are needed. Intelligence wants to be useful, to solve problems, to create something new and better. When existing solutions work well, there may be little opportunity for intelligence to demonstrate its value, which can lead intelligent people to invent problems that do not really exist or to exaggerate the importance of problems that existing solutions already handle adequately. The result is innovation for its own sake, rather than innovation in service of genuine improvements. Intelligent people become so focused on being innovative that they forget to ask whether innovation is actually needed or whether their innovations actually represent improvements over what already exists. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of the innovation paradox is how it can destroy valuable knowledge and practices that took generations to develop. When intelligent innovators replace traditional approaches with new methods, they often discard accumulated wisdom without fully understanding what they are losing. If the innovations fail, it may be difficult or impossible to recover the knowledge that was discarded. The people who understood the old methods may no longer be available to teach them, and the institutional memory that preserved those methods may have been destroyed. Innovation becomes a form of cultural amnesia, where intelligence destroys its own inheritance in pursuit of improvements that may never materialize. The paradox is complete. The desire to be smarter makes us collectively more stupid. Part 14. The Measurement Mirage. Intelligent people love numbers. There is something deeply satisfying about quantifying complex phenomena, creating precise measurements and using data to make decisions that feel objective and scientific. But this love affair with measurement can become a dangerous obsession that distorts rather than clarifies reality. When smart people become too focused on measuring and optimizing specific metrics, they often lose sight of the broader goals those metrics were supposed to serve. They create measurement systems that generate impressive-looking data while obscuring the very things they were trying to understand. The numbers become more real than the reality they were meant to represent. Consider what happens in healthcare systems when intelligent administrators decide to improve quality by measuring physician performance. They develop sophisticated metrics that track things like patient satisfaction scores, treatment completion rates, readmission statistics, and cost per procedure. These measurements seem objective and scientific, and they allow administrators to compare different doctors and different departments using quantitative criteria. But the act of measurement changes the behavior being measured in ways that can actually reduce the quality of care. Doctors who know they are being evaluated based on patient satisfaction scores may avoid giving patients difficult news or recommending unpleasant but necessary treatments. They may prescribe antibiotics for viral infections that do not need them, or pain medications for conditions that would be better treated with physical therapy, simply because these interventions make patients happier in the short term. Doctors who are measured on readmission rates may avoid treating the sickest patients who are most likely to need follow-up care. Those who are evaluated on cost metrics may skip thorough diagnostic procedures that could identify serious problems before they become expensive emergencies. The measurement system that was intended to improve healthcare quality actually incentivizes behaviors that reduce quality while making the numbers look better. Intelligence becomes counterproductive when it focuses more on optimizing measurements than on achieving the underlying goals those measurements were meant to support. Educational systems provide another vivid illustration of how intelligent measurement can produce stupid outcomes. When school administrators want to assess teacher effectiveness and student learning, they naturally turn to standardized test scores as seemingly objective measures of academic achievement. These scores can be compared across different schools, teachers and student populations, providing data that appears to reveal which educational approaches are most effective. But the focus on test scores fundamentally changes what happens in classrooms. Teachers who know their effectiveness will be judged by test scores, begin teaching to the test rather than teaching the broader skills and knowledge that tests are supposed to measure. They spend increasing amounts of time drilling students on test-taking strategies and practicing problems that are similar to those that will appear on the tests. This may improve test scores, but it may also reduce the time available for developing critical thinking skills, creativity, and deep understanding of subject matter. Students learn to perform well on standardized assessments without necessarily learning to think independently or to apply their knowledge in novel contexts. The measurement system creates the illusion of educational improvement while potentially undermining the actual goals of education. Intelligent educators become trapped by metrics that measure the wrong things or that change behavior in ways that make the measured outcomes less meaningful. Corporate environments often exhibit similar measurement pathologies. Intelligent managers develop key performance indicators and dashboard systems that are intended to provide objective data about business performance. These systems can track everything from employee productivity to customer satisfaction to operational efficiency, creating impressive displays of quantitative information that make decision-making feel scientific and data-driven. But employees quickly learn to game these measurement systems in ways that improve their measured performance without necessarily improving their actual performance. Sales representatives who are measured on the number of calls they make may focus on making easy calls to existing customers rather than pursuing more difficult but potentially more valuable new prospects. Customer service representatives who are evaluated based on call resolution times may rush through complex problems or transfer difficult cases to other departments rather than taking the time needed to actually solve customer issues. Software developers who are assessed based on lines of code written may create unnecessarily verbose programs rather than elegant, efficient solutions. The measurement systems that were supposed to align individual behavior with organizational goals actually create perverse incentives that optimize for metrics rather than for results. Intelligence is corrupted when it becomes more concerned with measuring success than with achieving success. Financial markets provide perhaps the most sophisticated and dangerous example of measurement becoming divorced from reality. Brilliant quantitative analysts have developed incredibly complex models that can measure and price risk with apparent mathematical precision. These models incorporate vast amounts of historical data and use advanced statistical techniques to calculate probabilities and expected returns for different types of investments. The models generate precise numbers that give investors and regulators confidence that risks are being properly understood and managed. But the precision of these measurements is often illusory. The models are based on assumptions about how markets behave under normal conditions, and they may break down completely when those conditions change. They measure historical patterns that may not predict future behavior, especially during periods of stress when normal relationships between different assets may disappear. Most importantly, the existence of these measurement systems changes market behavior in ways that can make the measurements less accurate. When many market participants use similar models and make similar decisions based on those models, they can create correlated risks that the models do not account for. The measurement systems that were supposed to make markets safer may actually make them more fragile by creating false confidence in risk management capabilities. The fundamental problem with the measurement mirage is that it allows intelligent people to feel that they are being objective and scientific when they are actually being subjective and narrow. The choice of what to measure, how to measure it, and how to interpret the measurements involves countless subjective judgments that are often hidden behind the apparent objectivity of quantitative data. Different measurement approaches can yield completely different conclusions about the same phenomena, but people who rely heavily on measurements may not recognize how much their conclusions depend on arbitrary methodological choices. They become overconfident in the validity of their measurements and underestimate the possibility that their measurement systems may be capturing something other than what they think they are measuring. Perhaps most dangerously, the measurement mirage can prevent intelligent people from recognizing important aspects of reality that cannot be easily quantified. Not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. When measurement systems become the primary basis for decision-making, qualitative factors like relationships, culture, intuition, and wisdom may be systematically undervalued or ignored entirely. The result is decisions that optimize for measurable outcomes while potentially sacrificing unmeasurable but equally important goals. Intelligence becomes impoverished when it can only see the aspects of reality that fit into numerical categories. The measurement tools that were supposed to enhance understanding actually create tunnel vision that makes intelligent people blind to dimensions of reality that their measurements cannot capture. Part 15. The Prediction Delusion. One of the most seductive and dangerous capabilities that intelligence seems to provide is the ability to predict the future. Smart people are exceptionally good at identifying patterns, analyzing trends, and extrapolating from current conditions to forecast what might happen next. This predictive ability feels like one of the most valuable applications of human intelligence, and it often becomes a source of great confidence and influence. But the reality is both humbling and terrifying. Intelligent people are systematically overconfident in their predictions and consistently underestimate the uncertainty inherent in complex systems. Their intelligence gives them the tools to make sophisticated forecasts, but it also gives them dangerous illusions about the reliability of those forecasts. The problem begins with how intelligent people process information about past events. When they look back at history, they see clear patterns and logical sequences of cause and effect. They can explain why particular events occurred and why specific outcomes were virtually inevitable given the circumstances. This retrospective clarity creates confidence that similar patterns can be identified in current conditions and used to predict future outcomes. But this confidence is based on a fundamental illusion. The past only seems predictable because we already know what happened. At the time those events were actually unfolding, they were full of uncertainty, randomness, and unpredictable interactions between multiple complex factors. Intelligent people mistake hindsight for insight, and assume that their ability to explain the past translates into an ability to predict the future. Economic forecasting provides a perfect illustration of how intelligence can create overconfidence in prediction. Brilliant economists with advanced degrees and sophisticated analytical tools regularly make predictions about economic growth, inflation rates, unemployment levels, and market performance. These predictions are based on complex mathematical models that incorporate hundreds of variables and relationships. The economists can explain in great detail why their models suggest that particular outcomes are most likely and why alternative scenarios are less probable. Their intelligence allows them to construct compelling narratives about how economic forces will interact to produce specific results. But when researchers actually examine the accuracy of economic forecasts, they find that economists' predictions are barely more accurate than random guesses, and that their confidence in their predictions is systematically higher than their accuracy warrants. The same pattern appears in virtually every field where intelligent people make predictions about complex systems. Political scientists who study elections can identify numerous factors that influence voting behavior and can construct sophisticated models that seem to predict electoral outcomes. But their predictions often fail when unexpected events occur, when voter preferences shift in ways that models do not anticipate, or when the interactions between different factors produce results that were not captured in the analysis. Technology experts who predict how new innovations will be adopted and how markets will respond to them are frequently surprised by outcomes that their analysis suggested were unlikely or impossible. Climate scientists who model future climate conditions based on current trends and known physical processes must constantly revise their predictions as new feedback loops and interaction effects are discovered. In each case, intelligence provides tools for making predictions, but it also creates overconfidence in the reliability of those predictions. The prediction delusion becomes particularly dangerous when intelligent people use their forecasts to make high-stakes decisions that affect large numbers of people. Urban planners who predict population growth and development patterns may design infrastructure projects based on their forecasts. If their predictions are wrong, cities may end up with insufficient transportation capacity or with expensive facilities that are underutilized. Investment managers who predict market movements may allocate their clients' money based on their forecasts. If their predictions are wrong, their clients may suffer significant financial losses. Policymakers who predict the effects of new regulations or programs may implement changes that have unintended consequences because their forecasts fail to anticipate how people and organizations would actually respond to the new policies. Part of the problem is that intelligent people often underestimate the role of randomness and chance in determining outcomes. They assume that if they can identify the relevant factors and understand how those factors interact, they should be able to predict results with reasonable accuracy. But complex systems often exhibit chaotic behavior where small, unpredictable changes can have large, unpredictable effects. Even if analysts perfectly understand all the important factors, the inherent randomness in how those factors combine may make accurate prediction impossible. Intelligence can help identify patterns and relationships, but it cannot eliminate the fundamental uncertainty that exists in complex, dynamic systems. Intelligent people may understand this uncertainty intellectually, but they often behave as if their analysis has reduced uncertainty more than it actually has. The prediction delusion is reinforced by selective memory and interpretation of past forecasts. When intelligent people make predictions that turn out to be approximately correct, they remember those successes and use them as evidence of their predictive abilities. When their predictions turn out to be wrong, they often reinterpret the outcomes in ways that preserve their confidence in their forecasting methods. They may argue that their predictions were directionally correct, even if the timing or magnitude was off. They may claim that unexpected external events invalidated their forecasts, rather than acknowledging that their analysis failed to account for important sources of uncertainty. They may revise their interpretation of what they were actually predicting in order to make their forecasts seem more accurate in retrospect. This selective memory and interpretation prevents them from learning from their predictive failures and maintains their overconfidence in future predictions. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the prediction delusion is how it can prevent intelligent people from designing systems that are robust to uncertainty. When people are confident in their ability to predict the future, they may create plans and policies that work well under the conditions they expect, but fail catastrophically when conditions turn out to be different. They may build systems that are optimized for the scenarios they consider most likely while being fragile to scenarios they consider unlikely, but that may actually occur. A more humble approach to prediction might lead to designs that work reasonably well under a wide range of possible conditions, even if they are not optimal under any particular set of conditions. But intelligence creates pressure to make specific predictions and to optimize for expected outcomes rather than to acknowledge uncertainty and design for robustness. The prediction delusion makes intelligent people less prepared for the unpredictable future they are trying so hard to predict. Part 16. The Teaching Trap. There is a peculiar phenomenon that occurs when intelligent people explain their knowledge to others. The act of teaching makes them more confident in what they know, even when what they know is incomplete or incorrect. This seems backwards. We might expect that the process of explaining complex ideas would reveal gaps in understanding and create intellectual humility. But research shows the opposite pattern. When people teach or explain concepts to others, they become more convinced of their own expertise and more resistant to information that challenges their explanations. The teaching trap transforms education from a learning opportunity into a confidence-building exercise that can actually make intelligent people more ignorant. The mechanism works through what psychologists call the explanation effect. When you explain something to another person, you must organize your thoughts, identify key concepts, and present information in a logical sequence. This process feels like deep understanding because it requires you to actively engage with the material and to think about how different pieces of information connect to each other. The fluency with which you can produce explanations becomes a signal to yourself that you truly comprehend the subject matter. But fluency in explanation is not the same as accuracy in understanding. You can become very good at explaining things that you do not actually understand correctly. And the better you become at explaining them, the more confident you grow in your misunderstanding. Consider what happens when intelligent people become teachers, professors, or expert consultants. They spend their days explaining complex concepts to students, clients, or colleagues who know less about the subject than they do. This constant explaining reinforces their sense of expertise and makes them feel like authorities in their fields. But the teaching context can also insulate them from the kind of challenging feedback that might reveal limitations in their knowledge. Students and clients rarely have the expertise needed to identify errors or gaps in explanations. So teachers receive positive feedback for explanations that may be incomplete or misleading. The social dynamic of teaching creates an asymmetry, where the teacher's knowledge is assumed to be superior, and questioning that knowledge can feel inappropriate or disrespectful. This dynamic becomes particularly problematic when teachers encounter new information that conflicts with what they have been teaching. Their investment in their explanations makes it psychologically difficult to acknowledge that those explanations might be wrong. They have built their professional identities around their ability to explain particular concepts in particular ways. Admitting that their explanations are flawed would require admitting that they may have been misleading their students or clients. So they often resist new information, or find ways to reinterpret it in ways that preserve their existing explanations. The teaching trap makes them more committed to their current understanding and less open to revising that understanding based on new evidence. The problem becomes especially acute in rapidly changing fields where new discoveries regularly challenge established explanations. Medical professors who have spent years teaching particular theories about disease mechanisms may resist new research that suggests those theories are incomplete or incorrect. They have developed sophisticated explanations that help students understand complex biological processes, and these explanations have been validated by positive student evaluations and successful learning outcomes. But when new research reveals that the biological processes are more complex than the simplified explanations suggest, the professors may defend their teaching approaches rather than updating them. They may argue that the simplified explanations are pedagogically valuable even if they are not scientifically accurate, or they may question the validity of research that challenges their established teaching methods. Their expertise in explanation becomes a barrier to accepting new knowledge. Business consultants and management experts face similar challenges with the teaching trap. They develop frameworks and methodologies that they teach to corporate clients as solutions to organizational problems. These frameworks may be based on limited experience or oversimplified analysis, but the act of teaching them to multiple clients makes the consultants increasingly confident in their validity. Each successful presentation reinforces their belief that they understand the key principles of effective management or organizational change. But when their frameworks fail to produce expected results, or when new research reveals flaws in their approaches, they may blame implementation problems rather than acknowledging that their frameworks might be inadequate. Their fluency in explaining their methods makes them resistant to evidence that those methods do not actually work as advertised. The teaching trap also affects how intelligent people process feedback about their explanations. When students or clients express confusion or ask challenging questions, teachers may interpret this as evidence that the students need better explanations rather than as evidence that the explanations themselves might be problematic. They may assume that confusion results from the student's lack of background knowledge or analytical ability rather than from gaps or errors in what is being taught. This interpretation protects the teacher's confidence while preventing them from recognizing when their explanations are actually creating confusion rather than clarity. The social dynamics of teaching can create feedback loops that reinforce overconfidence rather than promoting learning and improvement. Perhaps most dangerously, the teaching trap can prevent intelligent people from recognizing the limits of their own knowledge. When you can explain something fluently to others, it becomes easy to forget how much you do not know about the subject. The aspects of the topic that you understand well enough to explain become the entire topic in your mind, while the aspects that you do not understand well enough to explain are forgotten or dismissed as unimportant. Teaching creates an illusion of comprehensive understanding that can prevent teachers from continuing to learn and grow in their fields. They become trapped by their own explanations, unable to see beyond the boundaries of what they can currently teach. The teaching trap transforms education from a process of expanding knowledge into a process of reinforcing existing beliefs and explanations. The irony is that the best teachers are often those who remain deeply aware of what they do not know and who continue to question and revise their own understanding. But the psychological dynamics of teaching create pressure to appear confident and authoritative, which can undermine the intellectual humility that would actually make teaching more effective. The teaching trap makes intelligent people choose between appearing competent and remaining curious. Too often they choose competence over curiosity, and their intelligence becomes a performance rather than a tool for genuine learning and discovery. Part 17. The Echo Chamber Effect. Intelligence, rather than protecting us from the influence of our social environment, can actually make us more susceptible to the biases and blind spots of the smart people around us. This seems counterintuitive because we think of intelligence as a tool for independent thinking and objective analysis. But intelligent people often surround themselves with other intelligent people who share similar backgrounds, education, and ways of thinking. When smart people confirm each other's beliefs and validate each other's reasoning, they can create powerful echo chambers that amplify their collective biases, while making them feel more confident in their objectivity. The result is that groups of brilliant individuals can become collectively more foolish than any individual member would be on their own. The phenomenon begins with how intelligent people choose their social and professional networks. They naturally gravitate toward others who can engage with them intellectually, who share their interests in complex ideas, and who can appreciate the sophistication of their thinking. This creates social circles where everyone has similar levels of education, similar analytical abilities, and often similar conclusions about important issues. While this can create stimulating intellectual environments, it can also create insular communities where certain assumptions go unquestioned because everyone shares them. Consider what happens in elite academic institutions, where brilliant professors and researchers interact primarily with other brilliant professors and researchers. They read each other's work, attend each other's conferences, and serve on each other's editorial boards and tenure committees. This creates a closed intellectual ecosystem, where certain theories, methods, and perspectives become dominant, not necessarily because they are more accurate than alternatives, but because they're more popular within the community. Dissenting views may be marginalized not through careful evaluation of evidence, but through social dynamics that favor conformity with group norms. The intelligence of community members makes their consensus feel more credible, even when that consensus might be based on shared biases rather than superior analysis. The same pattern appears in corporate environments where smart executives and managers create strategic plans and make important decisions. They often surround themselves with other smart people who have similar business school educations, similar professional experiences, and similar analytical frameworks for understanding markets and organizations. When these intelligent people analyze business opportunities or competitive threats, they may all reach similar conclusions because they are all using similar assumptions and similar methods of analysis. Their agreement makes them confident that their analysis is objective and thorough, but it may actually reflect the limitations of their shared perspective rather than the strength of their reasoning. They may all be making the same mistakes because they all have the same blind spots. Technology companies provide particularly vivid examples of how echo chambers can develop among intelligent people. Software engineers, product designers, and data scientists often have similar educational backgrounds in technical fields and similar ways of thinking about problems. They may create products that seem brilliant from their shared perspective, but that completely miss the needs and preferences of users who do not share that perspective. When they test their products with other intelligent people who have similar backgrounds, they may receive positive feedback that reinforces their confidence in their design decisions. But when their products are released to broader markets, they may discover that their target users have completely different priorities and preferences than the echo chamber anticipated. The intelligence of the development team becomes a liability because it creates overconfidence in assumptions that are only valid within their particular community. Financial markets offer another illustration of how intelligent echo chambers can produce catastrophic results. Investment banks, hedge funds, and regulatory agencies are filled with some of the smartest people in the world, many of whom have advanced degrees in mathematics, economics, and finance. These intelligent people develop sophisticated models and theories about how markets work and how risks should be managed. But when they all use similar models and make similar assumptions, they can create systemic risks that none of them individually would choose to create. Their shared confidence in their analytical methods can lead them all to make similar investment decisions at the same time, which can destabilize the very markets they are trying to understand and profit from. The echo chamber effect makes intelligent people feel that their consensus validates their wisdom, when it may actually be amplifying their collective foolishness. Social media and digital communication technologies have intensified the echo chamber effect by making it easier for intelligent people to find others who share their views and to avoid exposure to challenging perspectives. Algorithms that determine what content people see are designed to show them information that is likely to engage their interest, which often means information that confirms their existing beliefs. Intelligent people who are confident in their analytical abilities may interpret this algorithmic curation as evidence that their views are more widely supported than they actually are. They may mistake the artificial consensus created by personalized information filtering for genuine consensus based on superior reasoning. The echo chamber effect becomes especially dangerous when intelligent people use their social networks to validate their own thinking rather than to challenge it. They may seek out feedback from people who are likely to agree with them rather than from people who might identify flaws in their reasoning. They may interpret agreement from other smart people as confirmation that their analysis is sound, without considering whether those people might share their biases or have access to the same limited information. This creates feedback loops where intelligence reinforces confidence rather than promoting accuracy. Smart people become trapped in bubbles of mutual validation that insulate them from the reality checks that might improve their thinking. Perhaps most troubling is how echo chambers can make intelligent people dismissive of perspectives that come from outside their social and intellectual circles. When their smart friends and colleagues all agree with their analysis, they may assume that people who disagree must be less intelligent, less informed, or less rational. They may not seriously consider alternative viewpoints, because those viewpoints come from people who are not part of their intellectual community. This prevents them from learning from people who might have different experiences, different expertise, or different ways of thinking about problems. The echo chamber effect makes intelligence insular and reduces its ability to benefit from the full diversity of human knowledge and perspective. Smart people become prisoners of their own social networks, unable to see beyond the boundaries of their own communities. Part 18. The Status Quo Fortress. Intelligent people often become the most effective defenders of systems and ideas that need to be changed. This seems paradoxical, because we think of intelligence as a force for progress and innovation. But when smart people have invested significant time and energy in mastering existing systems, they develop psychological stakes in preserving those systems that can override their ability to see when change is necessary. Their intelligence becomes a fortress that protects the status quo from the very improvements that intelligence should enable. The phenomenon begins with how intelligent people build their careers and identities around existing knowledge and established practices. They spend years learning complex rules, procedures, and theories that allow them to function effectively within current systems. This investment creates psychological ownership of those systems and resistance to changes that might make their hard-won expertise less valuable. When new approaches or technologies emerge that could improve upon existing methods, intelligent people may resist them not because the innovations lack merit, but because accepting them would require abandoning knowledge and skills that define their professional competence. Consider what happens when new technologies threaten to disrupt established professions. Intelligent lawyers who have spent decades mastering complex legal procedures may resist innovations that could make legal services more efficient and accessible. They may argue that the complexity of legal systems requires human judgment that cannot be replaced by automated tools. Their arguments may be sophisticated and may identify genuine limitations in the new technologies. But their intelligence may also be serving their interest in preserving a system that values their particular form of expertise, even when that system may not be serving their clients or society as well as alternative approaches might. They become skilled advocates for maintaining complexity that benefits them, rather than pursuing simplicity that might benefit others. Academic institutions provide another clear example of how intelligence can become a barrier to beneficial change. Brilliant professors who have built their careers around particular theoretical frameworks or research methodologies may resist new approaches that challenge their established ways of thinking. They may use their intelligence to identify flaws in new theories or methods, while being less critical of flaws in the approaches they have been using for years. Their sophisticated arguments against change may sound objective and scientific, but they may actually be motivated by the desire to protect investments in existing knowledge rather than by genuine concern for advancing understanding. The same pattern appears in business organizations, where intelligent managers and executives resist innovations that could improve performance, but that would also require them to abandon strategies and systems they have spent years developing. They may conduct detailed analyses that highlight the risks and costs of change, while underestimating the risks and costs of maintaining current approaches. Their intelligence allows them to construct compelling arguments for why existing methods are superior to proposed alternatives, even when those arguments may be more about protecting their own expertise than about optimizing organizational performance. They become champions of the familiar rather than explorers of the possible. Government agencies and regulatory bodies often exhibit similar resistance to change, with intelligent bureaucrats and policy experts defending existing rules and procedures against innovations that might better serve public interests. These experts have deep knowledge of current systems and can identify multiple ways that proposed changes might create unintended consequences or administrative challenges. Their analysis may be thorough and their concerns may be legitimate, but their expertise in existing systems may also make them biased toward preserving those systems rather than exploring alternatives. They become guardians of institutional knowledge rather than agents of institutional improvement. The status quo fortress becomes especially powerful when intelligent people can frame their resistance to change in terms of protecting important values or maintaining quality standards. They may argue that traditional approaches, despite their limitations, have been tested by experience and have proven their reliability over time. They may warn that innovations, despite their apparent advantages, carry unknown risks that could have serious negative consequences. These arguments can sound reasonable and prudent, and they may contain elements of truth. But they can also serve as sophisticated rationalizations for avoiding the uncertainty and effort that change requires. Intelligence provides the tools for making resistance to change sound like wisdom rather than fear. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of the status quo fortress is how it can prevent intelligent people from recognizing when existing systems are failing or causing harm. Their investment in current approaches can create blind spots that make them interpret evidence of failure as evidence of implementation problems rather than as evidence of fundamental flaws. They may assume that poor outcomes result from people not following established procedures correctly rather than from the procedures themselves being inadequate. Their intelligence goes to work explaining away problems rather than acknowledging that those problems might indicate the need for different approaches. The fortress effect can also make intelligent people dismissive of innovations that come from outside their established fields or institutions. They may assume that people who are not experts in current systems cannot possibly understand the complexity and nuance that those systems address. They may reject new ideas, not because those ideas lack merit, but because they come from sources that do not have the credentials or experience that the current system values. This creates barriers between different domains of knowledge and prevents the kind of cross-pollination that often leads to breakthrough innovations. The tragic irony of the status quo fortress is that it transforms intelligence from a tool for solving problems into a tool for avoiding problems. Instead of using their analytical abilities to identify better ways of achieving important goals, intelligent people use those abilities to justify why current methods should be preserved despite their limitations. They become more invested in being right about their existing knowledge than in discovering new knowledge that might be more useful. Their intelligence becomes a prison that keeps them trapped within the boundaries of what they already know, unable to explore the possibilities that lie beyond those boundaries. Part 19. The Wisdom Alternative. After exploring all the ways that intelligence can lead us astray, we might wonder whether being smart is more curse than blessing. But the problem is not intelligence itself. The problem is intelligence without wisdom, analysis without humility, cleverness without compassion. Throughout human history, the greatest thinkers have recognized that raw intellectual power must be tempered by deeper qualities that help us use our minds wisely rather than merely cleverly. The wisdom alternative offers a path beyond the traps and illusions that ensnare even the brightest minds. Wisdom begins with the recognition of our own ignorance. This is not false modesty or intellectual weakness. It is the accurate understanding that reality is vastly more complex than any individual mind can comprehend, and that our knowledge, no matter how extensive, represents only a tiny fraction of what could be known. When Socrates declared that he knew only that he knew nothing, he was not diminishing the value of knowledge. He was establishing the foundation for genuine learning by acknowledging the limits within which all human knowledge must operate. This recognition of limits creates intellectual humility that protects against the overconfidence that destroys so many brilliant minds. True wisdom involves learning to distinguish between what we can know with reasonable confidence and what we cannot know despite our best analytical efforts. Intelligent people often struggle with this distinction because their analytical abilities make them feel that they should be able to figure out almost anything if they just apply sufficient mental effort. But wise people understand that uncertainty is not a temporary condition that will be eliminated by better analysis. It is a permanent feature of complex systems that must be acknowledged and accommodated rather than ignored or wished away. They learn to make decisions and take actions despite uncertainty rather than pretending that uncertainty does not exist. This acceptance of uncertainty paradoxically makes them more effective at dealing with uncertain situations than people who demand false certainty before they will act. Wisdom also involves cultivating emotional intelligence alongside analytical intelligence. The wisest people throughout history have understood that pure rationality is not only impossible but also undesirable. Human beings are emotional creatures whose feelings provide important information about values, relationships, and situations that purely logical analysis might miss. Wise people learn to integrate emotional information with analytical information to make decisions that account for the full complexity of human experience. They do not suppress their emotions or dismiss them as irrational obstacles to clear thinking. Instead, they learn to understand what their emotions are telling them and to use that information as one important input among many in their decision-making processes. The cultivation of wisdom requires active engagement with people who think differently, who have different experiences, and who challenge our assumptions in productive ways. Intelligent people often surround themselves with others who share their perspectives and who confirm their biases. But wise people actively seek out disagreement and criticism as opportunities to test and improve their thinking. They understand that their own perspectives are inevitably limited and that other people may see important aspects of reality that they have missed. This does not mean accepting every criticism or agreeing with every alternative viewpoint. It means taking seriously the possibility that others might have insights that could improve their understanding, even when those insights come from unexpected sources. Practical wisdom also involves learning to focus on what matters most, rather than trying to optimize everything simultaneously. Intelligent people often become paralyzed by the complexity they can see in every situation and the multiple factors they feel they should consider in every decision. But wise people learn to identify the few most important considerations and to make decisions based on those key factors rather than getting lost in endless analysis of secondary concerns. They develop the ability to distinguish between decisions that require careful analysis and decisions that can be made quickly based on experience and intuition. This selectivity allows them to reserve their analytical resources for situations where analysis is most valuable, while avoiding the analysis paralysis that often afflicts highly intelligent people. Wisdom involves learning from failure rather than avoiding it or denying it. Intelligent people often become so invested in being right that they have difficulty acknowledging when they have made mistakes. But wise people understand that failure is an inevitable part of learning and that the ability to recognize and learn from mistakes is more valuable than the ability to avoid making mistakes in the first place. They develop systems for getting feedback about their decisions and for updating their approaches based on what they learn from both successes and failures. This creates continuous improvement rather than the stagnation that results from defending past decisions and approaches. The wisdom alternative also emphasizes the importance of considering long-term consequences and broader impacts, rather than focusing only on immediate goals and narrow optimization. Intelligent people often become so focused on solving specific problems that they lose sight of how their solutions might create new problems or affect other people and systems. But wise people develop the ability to think systemically about how their actions fit into larger patterns and how their decisions today might influence outcomes in the future. They learn to balance short-term efficiency with long-term sustainability and to consider not just whether they can do something, but whether they should do it. Perhaps most importantly, wisdom involves maintaining a sense of purpose and meaning that goes beyond demonstrating intellectual superiority or achieving personal success. The wisest people throughout history have been motivated by the desire to contribute to something larger than themselves, whether that is advancing human knowledge, serving their communities, or leaving the world better than they found it. This sense of purpose provides a framework for evaluating decisions and priorities that goes beyond narrow self-interest or intellectual vanity. It creates motivation for using intelligence in service of wisdom, rather than using intelligence to create the illusion of wisdom. The wisdom alternative transforms intelligence from a tool for self-aggrandizement into a tool for genuine service to others and to the broader human enterprise. Part 20. The Path Forward. We have journeyed through the dark territory where intelligence becomes its own enemy, where brilliance breeds blindness, and where the smartest among us make the most spectacular mistakes. The landscape we have explored is sobering, even frightening. But understanding the stupidity of the smart is not meant to discourage intellectual achievement or to celebrate ignorance. It is meant to liberate us from the illusions that make intelligence dangerous and to help us use our minds more wisely and more effectively. The path forward requires both courage and humility. The courage to question our most confident beliefs and the humility to acknowledge how much we do not know. The first step on this path is developing what we might call intellectual immune systems that protect us from our own cognitive biases and mental traps. Just as our bodies need immune systems to protect against diseases that threaten our physical health, our minds need protection against the errors that threaten our intellectual health. This means creating habits and practices that force us to slow down our thinking, to question our assumptions, and to seek out information that challenges our preferred conclusions. It means building systematic processes for getting feedback about our decisions and for learning from both our successes and our failures. One of the most powerful tools for developing intellectual immunity is what philosophers call steel manning rather than straw manning. When we encounter ideas that conflict with our own views, our natural tendency is to look for the weakest versions of those ideas and to focus on their most obvious flaws. This straw manning makes us feel smart and confident, but it does not actually test the strength of our own positions. Steel manning involves actively looking for the strongest versions of opposing arguments and seriously considering whether they might reveal limitations in our own thinking. This practice is psychologically difficult because it requires us to help our opponents make their best case against us. But it is also intellectually liberating because it allows us to discover errors and blind spots that we might otherwise never recognize. Another crucial practice is what we might call perspective multiplication. Before making important decisions or reaching firm conclusions, we can systematically consider how the situation might look from different vantage points. What would people with different backgrounds, different expertise and different values think about this issue? How might this decision affect people who are not represented in our analysis? What would we think about this situation if we encountered it 10 years from now with the benefit of hindsight? This practice helps counteract the tunnel vision that often accompanies expertise and the temporal myopia that focuses too heavily on immediate concerns. We also need to develop better relationships with uncertainty and embrace what some researchers call productive ignorance. Instead of treating uncertainty as a problem to be eliminated, we can learn to see it as information that should influence how we make decisions and how confident we should be in our conclusions. This means becoming comfortable with saying, "I do not know," when we genuinely do not know, and making plans that work reasonably well under multiple possible scenarios rather than optimizing for single predicted outcomes. It means investing in learning and adaptation capabilities rather than trying to create perfect plans that assume we can predict and control the future. The path forward also requires us to change how we think about intelligence itself. Instead of viewing intelligence as a fixed trait that some people have more of than others, we can think of it as a set of skills and practices that can be developed and improved throughout our lives. This growth mindset about intelligence makes us more open to feedback, more willing to admit mistakes, and more motivated to continue learning rather than simply defending what we already know. It transforms intelligence from a performance that must be maintained into a capacity that can be enhanced. We need to create social environments that support intellectual humility rather than punishing it. Too often, our institutions and cultures reward people for appearing confident and knowledgeable, even when that confidence is unjustified. We need to find ways to celebrate intellectual honesty, to reward people for admitting uncertainty and changing their minds when presented with better evidence. This might mean changing how we evaluate students, employees and leaders to emphasize learning and adaptation rather than just immediate performance. It might mean creating forums for constructive disagreement where people with different perspectives can engage productively rather than simply trying to win arguments. The path forward also involves rediscovering the value of interdisciplinary thinking and cross-domain learning. Many of the most serious errors we have examined result from experts becoming too isolated within their specialized domains. We need to create more opportunities for people with different types of expertise to work together on complex problems that require multiple perspectives. This means breaking down the silos that separate academic disciplines, professional specialties, and organizational departments. It means encouraging people to develop secondary areas of knowledge that complement their primary expertise and that help them see their work in broader contexts. Most importantly, the path forward requires us to remember that intelligence is not an end in itself, but a means to more important goals. The purpose of being smart is not to demonstrate our superiority over others or to accumulate impressive credentials and achievements. The purpose is to understand reality more accurately, to solve problems that matter, and to contribute to human flourishing in ways that go beyond our own narrow interests. When we keep these larger purposes in mind, intelligence becomes a tool for service rather than a tool for ego enhancement. The stupidity of the smart is not an inevitable curse that we must simply accept. It is a pattern that we can recognize, understand, and transcend. By acknowledging the ways that intelligence can deceive us, we can begin to use our minds more wisely. By embracing intellectual humility, we can avoid the overconfidence that destroys so many brilliant people. By remaining curious and open to learning, we can continue to grow, rather than becoming trapped by our own expertise. The path forward is not easy, but it is possible. And for those willing to walk it, intelligence can become what it was always meant to be. Not a source of arrogance and blindness, but a beacon that illuminates truth and guides us toward wisdom.